booktube, hello book friends, and welcome back to another video on my channel. As you probably can guess from the intro, this is an author spotlight video about the novelist Craig Thomas. It's a video that I've been wanting to record for some time, having read a lot of his books over the last 2 years or so, or rereading a lot of his books over the last 2 years or so, and I think he is probably the master techno thriller writer. That is an accolade that normally goes to somebody like Tom Clancy, but I think he has the edge over Tom Clancy in my opinion, controversial as that may turn out to be. But yes, let me tell you a little bit about Craig Thomas and some of his novels, and in particular some of the ones that I've really enjoyed in the last couple of years. So in total, Craig Thomas wrote 19 novels. Predominantly they're in 2 series, so there are around about 11, and this depends on 11 depending on how you count them, in what's known as the Aubrey and Hyde series. So that's 2 characters, Kenneth Aubrey and Patrick Hyde, who are the mainstays. And the reason there's some controversy about the numbers is because they're not both in all of the books. So they can't, some are Aubrey, some are Hyde, some are Aubrey and Hyde. So depending on how you count them. Then 4 in the Mitchell Gant series. The most famous of those would be Firefox, which is probably why you will have heard of this author. If you haven't heard of the name of the author, you've certainly heard of the name of that book. Then he wrote 2 standalones in his own name and 2 standalones under the pseudonym David Grant. So those are the kind of broad stats. His first book, Rat Trap, was published in 1976. He'd been writing radio plays in his time off as a teacher of English. So in the daytime, he taught sort of the classics, English literature, and in the evenings he read thrillers and the sorts of books that I think basically he was aspiring to write. And then he was having limited success with the radio plays until one day one of the editors said to him, why doesn't he try his hand at a novel, which he duly did. And ultimately the outcome of that was his first novel, Rat Trap, as I say, published in 1976. And then the following year he wrote published Firefox, which was an instant success. As you probably know, went on to be made into a movie with Clint Eastwood in the lead, and that kind of, I think, sealed his fate as a best-selling novelist from that point onwards. I certainly remember as a child, through the 70s, the 80s, and into the early 90s, he was a prominent fixture on bookshop shelves up and down the country, whether it be independent bookshops or the likes of W.H. Smith's and so on, even producing omnibus editions for the likes of Marks and Spencer's under their St. Michael brand. So this is an omnibus of the 2 Firefox novels, Firefox Down, and the first, is it the first? The first Aubrey and Hyde novel, Sea Leopard. So that was the first one that featured them both. And he carried on writing right into the 1990s, and sort of stopped around about the mid to late 1990s. Sadly, he died in 2011, and I think there's been 1 novel published posthumously, and recently the publisher Canelo have acquired the rights to his novels and have been republishing them, mostly as ebooks, but some paperbacks as well. So they're still, if you want to get into him as a author, there's still a very easy access point through ebooks. But there are also lots of his original novels in their kind of original bindings available secondhand on eBay and so on. So he's still very accessible author. But I think in the last, I suppose, 20 years, has kind of, because I guess because he's not been writing anymore, and that period from the late 90s to up until he passed away, there weren't any new books. So I think other authors kind of filled that void, which is in a way is a great shame. But I still rate him as an author, and as I say, I think if you like Tom Clancy, for example, you will like Craig Thomas. Those are the two kind of very similar, very different. Tom Clancy's very much CIA, the American way of doing things, and Craig Thomas is very much like MI6, Secret Intelligence Service, and so on. So you can take your pick. So let's talk about some of the books now. Let's start with the famous Firefox, as I say, made into a film with Clint Eastwood. Firefox was written in 1977, but Firefox Down didn't appear until about 1983, I think, and so there was a bit of a gap, but the two books are consecutive. One, Firefox Down, follows immediately after the events of Firefox, and it almost is worth reading them back to back because they are more or less one story, although they are two separate books, but you can read them. I wouldn't read Firefox Down without reading Firefox, because you do need to read the two consecutively, maybe not both at this, one immediately after the other, and then the other two in the Mitchell Gant series, Winterhawk and A Different War, take on different aspects, but with the same main character, in the retired Air Force. I think he's a major, who is still being brought in to do the special excuse me, the special missions that no one else can possibly pull off. And I'm still working I haven't read the final book. I read a lot of Craig Thomas's books as a teenager, and I had quite a few of them on my shelves, and then for whatever reason, I stopped reading them, probably because I was doing my kind of A-levels and going to university, and just didn't have the time for those sorts of books, because they're normally kind of sort of 400 or 500 pages, so they're a bit of an investment in time. But I've now been going back and rereading the ones that I've already read and reading the ones that I haven't, and kind of rediscovering him again, and it's been a fantastic experience. The Aubrey and Hyde series, so Kenneth Aubrey is the kind of strategic spy master, and Patrick Hyde is very much the agent in the field, doing all the jobs and all the dirty work. And I really love that series. Of the two, I prefer the Aubrey and Hyde to the Mitchell Gant, even though I love reading Firefox. Is one of my favourites overall in the entire in his entire catalogue of books. But yeah, I think there are particular ones. Sea Leopard, which is the first, and I mentioned is in that omnibus, is really good, and it's kind of the counterpoint to Firefox. Firefox is about the super Mach 5 capable MiG-31 that the Russians have built two prototypes for, and there is it has thought controlled weapons systems and all sorts of techno, it's stealth and so on, and it's one of those aircraft that, if it ever came into production, would tip the balance between the East and the West in the favor of the Russians. And the West have no hope of kind of matching it, so they decide to steal one of the prototypes. And so that's the story. Sea Leopard is the opposite. It's the super submarine that the British have in the Royal Navy. Stealth, highly capable, which the Russians have no hope of matching, so they decide to steal the secrets of. So it's, you know, there are similarities in the stories and counterpoints all the way through, and I think that's why, you know, there are characters who run throughout a lot of the novels. Certainly in the sort of Aubrey and Hyde series, the where they're both together, the bulk of that series is about the same characters. And again, I would recommend reading them in order, but you know, it's entirely, you can pick any one of them, and I think you'll get a good read, whatever you choose to do. But it is, if you're going to probably start with Sea Leopard and work forward, because the previous books to that are more about Aubrey and more about his backstory than anything else. In particular, I've really enjoyed All the Grey Cats, The Bear's Tears, and The Last Raven as a sequence of three, where the action shifts from everywhere, from the UK, Afghanistan during the time of the Russian invasion, through to sort of Europe, America. You know, can be quite globe-trotting novels, and they are really, seem to me anyway, to be really factually accurate. And there is a story that when Thomas was writing Firefox, he obviously didn't have a lot of money. He was still working as a teacher. He'd only published the one previous novel. And so for all the settings that are in Russia, in Moscow, he was using guidebooks and maps to help with the setting the scene and writing them. And then he famously said, you know, now that I could actually afford to go to Russia, I probably can't go because I don't think the Russians are very happy with me about the novel that I wrote around Firefox. So yeah, I think Thomas writes incredibly suspenseful, action-packed novels. He does suspense and peril incredibly well. And the kind of technological side of it as well is just first class. You know, I'm sure he had help from, you know, scientists and people in the know, but fundamentally he's the one who wrote the books, and, you know, he's the one who put them out there for people like me and you to read. So yeah, that's what can I say? He is sadly no longer with us, which I think is a great shame, but he has left an incredible legacy of books, and I would recommend you check him out. As I say, start with Firefox or Sea Leopard or any of them, but, you know, take your pick, and I hope you enjoy them too. If you have been, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.